We're talking about research and how you do research. This is a problem. This is a problem. And of course, this is something everybody complains about. You guys were here, Europeans came over, they started messing with you, and they didn't stop. They just didn't stop. They kept telling you that your way of doing things was incorrect, that you needed to become a Christian. They told you all kinds of crazy stuff. This is a real serious problem. We have the same problem in the United States today. So if we were to go, if all of a sudden we started fighting against Iran, which yesterday Trump said that we're closer to a war with Iran than we've ever been. I don't know why the hell he said it, but he did. He said it at a meeting. So what's the problem with Iran? Well, that's not really the question I want to ask. How would we know how Iranians think? How would we know how they act? If we actually did start a war with them, and this happened when we fought the war against Iraq and Afghanistan, one part of our problem was we didn't understand them. We didn't understand them at all. I mean, we overthrew the government in Iraq, and then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. Now, what was going on? Did we make a mistake? Did we do something stupid? Well, actually, what we thought was going to happen was whatever we wanted to happen. I mean, we beat them militarily, therefore they're defeated, and now they have to do what we wanted to do. That's what we thought would happen. But the reality was we didn't understand their religion. They're all Muslims. Shouldn't they all be able to get along? No, of course not. Well, of course not. There was a problem with, because there were two different groups of Muslims in their country, the Shia and the Sunni. And the Shia didn't like the Sunni, and they were willing to kill each other. Because they didn't like each other so much. So they started blowing up each other's mosques, their religious buildings. And we didn't understand. We're going, what the hell's going on here? You know, we've seen Catholics and Protestants for centuries, and they don't always kill each other. Sometimes they do, but now they don't. What's happening with the Sunnis and the Shias? We didn't understand their religion. We didn't understand how they thought. We thought when Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, when he said this is going to be the mother of all wars, when he said this is going to be the mother of all wars, he meant I'm going to attack you. I'm going to try to kill you the best way I can. But the reality was that's the way they talk. They talk a good ball game, but then they don't play. They're always rattling their sabers. They're always talking like they're about ready to attack you, but they don't ever attack you. And of course, as Americans, we thought, well, if they said it, they must mean it. And the reality was, of course, he didn't mean it at all. It was just his way of controlling his population, the people that he was living with, because they expect him to be strong. But the strength that they expect him to show isn't actual strength, it's just bluster. That's what they expected him to do. And we didn't understand that. We didn't recognize that. So we went to war, and we probably didn't have to. We destroyed their government, who was controlling this sectarian war. Sectarian means religious. They were controlling this sectarian war that we didn't understand, and all of a sudden we've got Shias and Sunnis killing each other in the street. And we got in between. We're going, now stop fighting, boys, now stop fighting, and it just didn't work. We couldn't do it. That's a problem. We need to understand people from their own perspective. And that's what ethnic research is all about. It's one of the reasons why the Spanish did what the Spanish did when they came into the Southwest, when they came into Mexico, when they conquered the Inca in South America, then they conquered the Mayans, and they conquered the Aztecs, then they wandered all the way up here and took over the pueblos. Why did they take over the pueblos and not other places? Because most of the other tribes in the area were relatively nomadic, and they couldn't catch them. The way that they defeated people was to occupy where they lived. And of course, the pueblos were easy because they were a select group of buildings. All they needed to do was capture those buildings and they were good to go. But the Spanish wanted to convert everybody to Catholicism. They didn't want to allow anybody else to have any other religion, and they didn't recognize any other religions. So it's one of the reasons why they did what they did. So the first step you should take when you're studying another group of people or another culture is to learn something about the culture that you're studying. That's what you need to do. You need to figure out who these people are. And that's, of course, the thing that I did when I came down here. I read all the books I could about the Navajo. And there's not that many. But I was lucky. There were novels, which are a lot easier to read than, historical texts. There were novels that dealt with the Navajo, which was kind of fun. So I read all of Tony Hillerman, which gave me an idea, and it just gave me an idea. It wasn't the definitive idea, but it gave me an idea of what was going on. A little bit of knowledge can go a long way in avoiding costly and embarrassing mistakes. I understood that there were taboos here, that I needed to follow those taboos, or I needed to at least recognize those taboos. And of course, I think you were in one of my first classes. I talked about this in my first classes, that I was afraid that I might break a taboo that I didn't know about. There is nudity in today's lecture. I need to tell you that right now. Cool. Okay. But it's not pornographic. That's kind of pornographic. No, it's not pornographic.
Cool.
Schrader and his colleagues in 1997 were researching family meals. They sought information from rural India and called ahead to optimize their time in India. Of course, it costs a lot of money to fly from the United States to India. Though people in this area of rural India didn't participate in family meals, an obliging local psychologist convinced the family to sit down at a table to simulate what the researchers were looking for. They were trying to see how people ate family meals. Their theory being, of course, people that eat family meals, the family that eats together stays together. That was the idea. But people in India don't do that. Males eat separately from the females. The children eat with the females. It's that kind of a deal. They don't all sit down together. The researchers happily recorded their discovery because they found all these people eating together. They assumed that this is the way it was. So they put it in their research. And unfortunately, they were wrong. But for years, they claimed, we went over there, we saw these people eating together. This is the way it is. And of course, people from India are going, they don't eat that way. What are you guys talking about? So they were wrong. But of course, the Indian psychologist wanted to give them what they wanted. So he had a group of Indians sit down for a family meal, which they don't normally do. This is the way they normally eat. The men eat together, and then the females eat together. Women eat separately from the males. And of course, the older you are, the more food you get. You get the first food, and then it goes down as you get older, or younger, you're served last. That's the way it works in India anyway, and that ain't true. That's just not the way it works. They don't sit down at tables, obviously. As you can see, they're eating off of leaves, off the ground. This is just the way it is. And of course, Schrader got it absolutely incorrect. One can learn about another culture in a variety of different ways. The simplest way is to read existing texts and ethnographies about the culture. I was on the Fort Belknap Reservation. And Fort Belknap Reservation initially the Presbyterian Church was there trying to Christianize the Indians, the Gros Ventre and the Assiniboine. And then the Presbyterians got tired of being in Montana where it's so damn cold, so they left and the Catholics came. So the Catholics built their churches, they built schools, they built Catholic schools so that they could Christianize the Plains Indians up there. And a ethnographer came out from Washington, D.C., Catholic University. If you've ever heard of Catholic University, it's in Washington, D.C. It's I don't even want to get into the politics of Catholicism, but different groups, different nationalities control the priesthood in the United States. So places like Notre Dame, there's a reason why they call them the Irish, it's because they're Irish Catholic. If you go other places in the United States, they're Italian Catholic, they're Polish Catholic, they're French Catholic, they're Spanish Catholic, they're whatever. But in Washington, D.C., they're Italian Catholic. So they sent their priests out there, and they sent an ethnographer out. And of course, this is in the 19th century, and he's writing all this stuff down, and he's following people around and asking them questions. And he wrote it up in 2 big yellow books. They're called the Yellow Books. One is about their culture, the other is about their religion. So there's 2 of them. The one about the religion is much smaller than the one about their culture. But I've got them at home. I guess I could have brought them to show you. Anyway, he wrote these books about what he saw in the 19th century. How accurate is it is another question. I mean, if he were following Navajos around, would you guys tell him the truth? Are there some things that you guys can't tell people about? Ceremonies? Secret things? Sure. Well, it's the same way up there. So he's writing this down as if it's the gospel, as if that's the only answer to any question. Now the problem is that what happened up there is that they all went to boarding school. When they came back, they didn't have any traditions. They didn't have any traditions. So what did they do? They read the yellow books to find out how they were supposed to act. At least they've got a book that tells them. The problem is that it doesn't have all the answers in it. It only has some of the answers in it. So all the really important stuff, all the magic stuff, all the, well, you understand. They have pipe bundles. They have bundles that go with pipes, and they have there are 2 pipes. There's a flat pipe and a feathered pipe, and these are the pipes that protect their tribe from whatever, from the spiritual world or whatever. But now they've lost all the ceremonies that go along with the bundles, so they can't open the bundles to make the pipes work, as weird as that is. Anyway, and it certainly doesn't say that in the yellow books. Okay, so when we're talking about ethnographies, really what we're talking about is history of the tribes. And of course, this is one of the questions I've asked about Navajo. When you talk about your traditions, are you talking about pre-Columbian? Are you talking about after Columbus got here? 450 years ago. That's a question that you need to ask yourselves, not me, and I don't need to ask you this question. You need to ask yourselves. I mean, this fits so well with Christianity. Is this the way is this the way it actually was, or is this something that we had to adjust in order to make the Spaniards happy or the Americans happy? Anyway, this is one of the things that we need to think about. There was a writer that went to Africa, and he looked at this one tribe, and people called them the dirty people because nobody liked them. They called them liars. And they were so bad as liars that they wouldn't even tell anybody the name of their tribe. So they called themselves something else. So he's writing all this stuff down. They're giving him all this information, and half of it is completely erroneous. It's completely not true. And so eventually what happened was the tribe dissolved. And so somebody married a member of the tribe, and of course she wasn't supposed to tell anybody about all these secrets that they had about the tribe, but she did. She told them half-truths. Anyway, she changed the story. So now we've got two stories. We've got the story that everybody was lying to this guy about, and now we have another story, but he doesn't know how much of that information is true. So what he did, he asked other people from other tribes who had interacted with these individuals if this were true or not. So the story that he got was not the story from the tribe, it was how people viewed these people. So now and he wrote it all up in a book, and he said, you know, at the end, I have no idea whether any of this is true or not. If you think about it, I mean, so where did you get the name Navajo? You got the name Navajo from the Spanish and the Hopi. And it either means something not so bad or means something pretty nasty, which is thieves, raiders. Comanche, you guys, I don't know. And I don't know what your word for the Comanche is. Maybe you don't have a word for them. But Comanche is a Ute word that means the enemy, or the people that kill us all the time is what Comanche means. It's a Ute word.
I was told they're called meaning arrowhead people.
I'm sorry, what?
Arrowhead people?
Oh, arrowhead people. I thought you guys were the arrowhead people. What, their heads are shaped like arrowheads?
I think it's just weaponry.
Oh, they use arrowheads, okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Interesting. But the Utes call them the people that kill us all the time. Sioux means the enemy. Almost all people, the name that they have, whoever gave them that name gave it to them from somebody else. So they didn't go into the tribe and say, hey, what do you guys call yourselves? You know, they didn't do that. The Nez Perce. Nez Perce, pierced noses, the French gave them that name because there were Indians there that had pierced noses. Well, it turned out it wasn't the Nez Perce, it wasn't the Numina, it was I'm sorry, Nimeku, Numina are the Comanche, what the Comanche call themselves. Sorry, I got it backwards there. Anyway, so this is really important stuff. I mean, if you want to understand who this guy is, you know, you need to talk to him and you need to get him to tell you what's going on. You need to read ethnographies. You need to read all the information you can find about those select groups of individuals. This can be very important. My brother was in intelligence. He was in Army intelligence. And one of the problems that they had, this is during Vietnam, one of the problems they had was they didn't have any good information. And they weren't getting good information because the information they were getting were either from their allies who were trying to get them to give them more money and give them more arms, or it was from the mountain people, and the mountain people hated the people that lived in the valleys, so they couldn't get any good information. Same thing has been happening in Afghanistan. The people that are allied with us are the mountain tribes, are the northern tribes. They speak Darcy, they speak a completely different language than the people that live around Kabul, who have a language that is very similar to the people in Pakistan. And they're the ones that are the Taliban. So you need to understand these things. Sometimes it can kill you if you get the wrong information. Well, I'm not talking about cultural psychology, I'm talking about military situations. We had the same problem in Japan with the Japanese during World War II. We didn't understand how their brains worked. We didn't understand what their philosophy was. Completely different from our philosophy. Our philosophy is, the biggest and baddest guy with the biggest gun is the one that attacks somebody. But the Japanese mindset is completely different. The Japanese, I don't know if you've ever watched any of the samurai movies. Hi, OJ. Oh, he smiles at you and he doesn't smile at me. That's not right.
Doesn't smile at me either.
He likes you. Obviously he doesn't like me. What are we talking about? The Japanese. Okay, so yeah, so if you've ever watched this samurai movie, the guy just stands there and all of a sudden he draws his sword and chops people into pieces. He doesn't show any emotion. He doesn't telegraph what he's going to do next. Well, that's the way the Japanese really are. The Japanese, you never know what they're thinking. Even you don't even know if what they tell you is true. Because if you ask them a question, they always say yes. We're going to talk about this later on. But they always say yes. Because they don't want an awkward situation where two people are arguing. If you've ever been to Japan, they never yell at each other. They never argue with each other. That never happens. The only people that yell are the police. And it's usually when somebody's drunk or somebody's doing something wrong. But they never say no. So, you know, if I'm there and I go up to a young lady and I say, hey, you want to have sex? She won't say yes. What she'll say is, well, that sounds like a good idea, but I'm not really sure we should be doing these kinds of things. She won't say no. She never says no, because that would create a negative situation. And of course, this is a problem that our GIs have had going on. I mean, in the United States, you know, you proposition somebody and they either say yes or no, or they punch you in the face. But in Japan, nobody punches you in the face, and they never say no. So our GIs think that they're making time with this young lady, and the next thing they know, they're sexually assaulting her, and now we've got a rape charge for our troops because they just don't understand what's happening. They don't understand that the culture is different.
But don't they, instead of saying you want to have sex, all they say is how much?
No. No, they hardly have, they don't have that many prostitutes. And you'd have to, if you ask somebody thinking that they were a prostitute how much it was going to cost, now you could be arrested for propositioning somebody. You'd be in real trouble if you tried to proposition somebody that wasn't a prostitute. Oh my God. No, if you want to go to a brothel, you have to go to a brothel. If you want a geisha, and of course there's different levels of geisha, but if you tried to proposition a upper level geisha who is just an entertainer, she's not a prostitute, man, you'd be in all kinds of trouble. You might lose your head.
The reason why I say that is because I have a adopted brother out there in Tokyo, Japan. He's the son of the chief of the police academy.
Of the what?
The police academy
Oh, okay.
in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
He was telling me that. He goes, you know, it's difficult to get women out here in that one nation. But back in Tokyo, it's different. You just go to someone and say how much. And that's how you know whether they'll give it to you or not.
He's talking about a prostitute that you know is a prostitute. Maybe setting you up to get yourself punched in the face. And actually, they wouldn't even hit, well, they would. Hopefully they just hit you and not cut you, because you don't want to mess with them. You're starting to mess with individuals that, Yakuza. You don't want to, they'll just cut you. It's kind of interesting. But I mean, it's not like I would ever come in contact with those people. I would have to go to a select place in order to even run into a prostitute, to even know where I wouldn't even know where she was, you know. But of course the Japanese know where they are, and the Japanese don't go down there unless that's what they're looking for. They have knowledge, and of course they're not going to tell you. They're not going to give you that information, but that's what he was talking about. You can go to the right place and actually find them. Another approach is to find a collaborator who is from the culture you are studying and who is interested in pursuing the same research with you. Marius and I talk about history all the time. Is he a collaborator? Well, no, yeah, kind of, because he gives me information that I don't have. And potentially I share the information that I have with him. So we kind of collaborate on trying to discover what's going on as far as the history of this area is concerned. The more involved your collaborator is in the project, the more likely you will get accurate information. The problem is you're going to get a lot of bad information. Potentially you can get all kinds of bad information, like you got from the police chief's son. Just ask him how much they want. Yeah, right. Yeah, try that any place in the world. You're going to lose some teeth if you're not careful. Wow, that was mean. He set you up. The International Association of CrossCultural Psychology is an organization of researchers studying culture and psychology from all around the world, and its members routinely find members from other countries to collaborate with on cross-cultural projects. And of course, they're all over the world. Oh, here's the nudity. Another effective strategy is to immerse oneself in another culture to learn it firsthand. I wouldn't suggest to you, she took off her shirt. I mean, she's in Africa where they don't wear shirts, and she's a researcher, and she took her shirt off. I don't know. I don't know how you want to look at this. And of course, they're looking at her breasts and going, you know, they're not like ours, and they aren't. For one thing, they're different. Hue, they're a different color, but they're also shaped differently than the other ladies. If you wear a brassiere, of course, and you support your breast tissue, then they're going to look differently than if you've never done that before. So as you can see, their breasts are different, shaped differently than hers are. This is an excellent way to gain a rich understanding of another culture, but it can be time-consuming, and it can also be costly. There is no substitute for first-hand experience. It's nice to be there. The question is, who are you when you're there? Should I dress in, should I grow my hair in a long and then put it in a Navajo bun? Is that what I should do? Should I wear Navajo moccasins? Would it be easier for me to be accepted if I had my bun and I had my moccasins? Or would that seem inappropriate? I'm thinking it would be inappropriate.
Yeah.
Because I would look like a wannabe. I want to be one of you guys. The reality is I respect your culture, but I don't want to be, I can never be Navajo. But there are people that want to be Navajo. Okay.
I guess, you know, like on some days, on certain occasions, if you made a statement saying, you know, I'm actually flexible in that way, where I can do it, but then overall I know my true identity.
Yeah. I think your true identity is very important.
Yeah.
I think we all need to be who we are. And if we try to act like somebody else, like me acting like a Navajo, or me acting like somebody from the South, you know, affecting the accent of a Southerner, saying y'all, you know, that kind of stuff, that wouldn't be genuine. And I don't, and this happens in the military all the time. If I'm from Indiana, and I'm down in Texas, hell, half the Air Force bases are in Texas, or used to be. If I'm living in Texas, do I wear cowboy boots? Do I wear a cowboy hat? Do I wear tight blue jeans and act like somebody from Texas? Do I affect their accent in order to be accepted by them? Do I change the way that I think? Should I change the way that I act in order to be like the people in Texas? And the answer is, the answer that I came up with was no. I always need to be myself. I need to be who I am. If I'm living in Mississippi, just because people in Mississippi are racist pigs, doesn't mean that I need to be a racist pig as well. I don't need to act like them to be accepted by them. I need to act like myself. And that's what I try to do. You know, my wife and I were in the service for 30 years, And that's what I tried to do no matter where I was, whether it was Lubbock, Texas, or Dayton, Ohio, or Mississippi, or California, or Montana, or Colorado. It didn't, or Nebraska, it really didn't make any difference. We tried to act like ourselves. And I feel better about that. I feel good about that, because I didn't change who I was just to be able to get along with people. But some people did. When they were in the South, they acted racist, no matter where they were from. If they were in Texas, they wore cowboy boots. And I always thought that was just not quite right, to act like somebody else just to get along, just to be able to get along.
You know,
It's
with
not
me, with me and my brothers, some of my cousins, we have this saying of like always teasing some of our family members, like if somebody moves to the city and they start acting like them, talking like them.
Sure.
That they don't speak that one language much, or they don't want to help out in ceremonies.
Right.
Or either that, they're trying to do something traditional, but then it doesn't work out for them, and they just kind of like obviously forgot about it.
Right.
We have a saying, I'm calling the people like that, lost tribe.
Lost tribe,
Yeah.
one of the lost tribes of Israel.
Yeah, because they actually, forgot about their identity. And
Right.
ways of being.
Right.
As a, then at the same time, it's like, kind of like a little bit of pride on the side.
Sure.
Knowing who you are,
Exactly.
where you belong.
You know, there's more urban Indians than there are reservation Indians. There are more people living in cities who have native ancestry than there are people living on the reservations. And of course, we refer to these as urban Indians. Once upon a time in the 1950s and 1960s, they moved people off the reservation and found them jobs in the cities. One of the, and mostly it was along the west coast, it was the relocation, and where they took the best and the brightest off the reservations and they moved them to the cities. And this especially happened in Oakland. And there's a book right now, I can't think of the name. It just came out a couple of years ago. It's about an urban Indian in Oakland and what happened in Oakland. It's by a guy with a last name of Orange. Kind of curious. This is the nudity that I was talking about. Okay. Are you offended?
No.
Okay, I'll try to offend you in the next picture then. There are more pictures, but not of her. Yeah, but it's really kind of interesting what you're saying. You got to be true to yourself, I guess. My sister is from the same place I am, of course. I mean, she was raised, she's just a year older than I am. She moved to Chicago, and now she talks like somebody from Chicago.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, God, drives me crazy.
Right.
She's got that Chicago accent, and it just drives me nuts.
I have relatives that go up to Wisconsin to visit our Ho-Chunk.
Oh, you have Ho-Chunk ancestry?
No, not ancestry,
Friends?
just adopted family.
Ah.
Yeah, through ceremonial ways. And then when they come back, they end up saying Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Oh my gosh, it's just like, it's called Wisconsin.
It's Wisconsin. Dude, that's a long.
You actually pronounce it right, it's Wisconsin.
You gotta say it through your nose.
Yeah, not Kansas.
Wisconsin, yeah, that's my sister. She goes to Wisconsin from time to time, too. In 1997, Patricia Greenfield was doing field research about the making of textiles in Mexico. She gave the Zinacantecos women the same survey about their textile making that she had used all over the world. With all the women that she'd ever been around, she gave the Zinacantecos women the same survey. She had no problem with it. No matter where she was, the women did the survey, no problems. But the women, the Zinacantecos women got angry. And the reason they got angry was because of the survey. The Zinacantecos women approached the survey as they would a conversation. When Greenfield asked similar questions, a methodologically sound interview technique, in other words, she's asking the same questions over and over and over again, or the same kinds of questions, they thought she was telling them that they were stupid, or that she was stupid. And it really upset them. So she couldn't give them the same survey, or she had to take out some of the questions because they were insulting the Zinekantecos women. I mean, how many times do you ask somebody the same damn question? I already answered that question. Anyway, having your methods perceived in identical ways across different cultures is termed methodological equivalence. Sometimes researchers have to adapt their procedures so that it is understandable to each culture equally. And of course, in order to understand that, you need to learn about their culture. You need to understand their culture to understand if your question is being taken the same way. I had a friend from, he taught Native American studies up in Billings, Montana. This guy was a Jewish guy from New York City, okay? He taught Native American studies in Billings, Montana. Now, Billings, Montana has the Crow Reservation just south of, the Crow and the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is right there, right just south of Billings. North is the Grovant, the Métis are in Lawrenceville, which is just north of Billings. You've got all these natives around Billings. So who do they hire to be to teach Native American studies? Is it a Crow? Is it a Northern Cheyenne? Is it a Grovant? Is it a Sioux? Is it one of the Métis? No, they hire a Jewish guy from New York City to teach Native American studies, as strange as that is. Now the weird part about that was that he has a PhD in Native American studies, but he did his research here on this reservation with the Navajo. And here, so what do they do up in Billings, Montana? They hire a guy who did his research. He's Jewish, he's not even native, but he's from New York City, someplace where they haven't had Indians since the 17th century. And he did his research on the Navajo reservation, and he's teaching Native American studies in and around, 7 different reservations. As stupid as that sounds. It gets worse. Montana University, let's see, it's IMSUN. Montana Northern University, Montana IMSUN. Montana State University Northern, that's what it is. Montana State University Northern. Montana State, that's out in Bozeman. They hire a guy from Finland to teach Native American studies. A guy from Finland. He's not even from the United States. He barely speaks English, and they hired him to teach Native American studies. In between, it's in Havre, Montana. 28 miles to the east is Fort Belknap, which is Grovant and Assiniboine. 5 miles to the west is Rocky Boy Reservation, which they're Chippewa Cree. So who do they hire to teach Native American studies? A guy from Finland. Does that make any sense at all? How logical is that?
Maybe there might have been some kind of disagreements amongst these tribes.
No, they just didn't want to hire an Indian. So one hired a guy from New York, the other hired a guy from Finland to teach Native American studies. A lot of racism up there in Montana. Yeah, disagreement between tribes. Oh, we like the Sioux, so we're not going to hire a Gromon. The vast majority of cross-cultural research has been conducted between industrialized societies. Most of them will compare North Americans with East Asians. A lot of us comparing the people from the United States with people from Japan or China. Studying college students from different cultures also lends itself. How would you feel if instead of Avery and Wilson they hired a guy from, I don't know, France to teach Native American studies? How'd you like that? Yeah, I know. That
Wouldn't make sense.
Wouldn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any more sense up north than it does down here. Studying college students from different cultures also lends itself to making meaningful comparisons, as students the world over tend to be familiar with many of the kinds of procedures used in psychological studies. And college students tend to be an accessible sample for most university researchers. Why? Because you're right here. It's easy for me to do research, and I don't even have to pay you. All I have to do is give you credit for doing my surveys. So a lot of psychological research is done on college students. When researchers overemphasize college students, there tends to be a significant problem with generalizability. You're the best and the brightest, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to get into this college. So how in the world are you, do you represent the entire population of whoever you're supposed to represent? Do you or don't you? And the answer is probably not. The research can be generalized with any populations other than other college students. And that's one of the reasons why when I did my research, it was dealing with American Indians, but I couldn't generalize it to anybody except American Indians in that portion of Montana. Because, I mean, it certainly didn't have anything to do with people down here. It certainly didn't have to do with anybody in Oklahoma. It just had to do with the American Indians living in Montana. Overusing students affects your power of your research. Power reflects the quality of the design of the study and determines if your design is sensitive enough to identify the anticipated effects. Sometimes the hypothesis is correct, but the design doesn't have the power to be able to provide support for it. In cross-cultural studies, culture should always be an independent variable, and of course it was in my research as well. If researchers contrast two similar cultures, they would not have as much variance in their independent variable as if they had compared two very dissimilar cultures. So if we compared people in the United States with people in Canada, well, we're pretty close to each other. We're very similar to each other, kinda. They have natives up there. I'm sorry, did I say natives? I meant First Nation people. They have First Nation people up there. So wouldn't we be similar? They have white people up there. We have white people. They have black people, but not very many. They have some, not very many. Maybe 5, 6, 7%. Ours is closer to 13% of our population is African American, is of African descent. So if we compared ourselves with Canada, as a matter of fact, the guy that wrote your textbook is Canadian. And when I selected this textbook, I thought, oh good, finally I'm gonna make Sarah happy. She's Canadian. Maybe she'll like this textbook. It's a good textbook, it's a really good textbook. I was pleased that I picked this textbook. But then when she taught this class, and I gave her that textbook, she didn't like it. And so she picked one of a researcher from, or a textbook author from Southern California, as weird as that is. So I picked the Canadian for my textbook, and she picks the person from Southern California. As funny as that is, or not funny at all. We did the same thing with well, I didn't pick a psychology and law textbook trying to make her happy. I picked one that I thought was the better textbook. She picked one from Southern California again, people out of Claremont. I don't know. Sometimes you just can't make people happy. Psychological contexts do not always translate from one culture to the next. Japanese ame has no equivalent in English. Ame is inappropriate behavior that shows dependence on someone else. We would refer to it as codependence. It used to be referred to as codependence. Codependence kind of dropped out of the DSM-5, so we don't really talk about codependence anymore. But in Japan, that's very, very common. So if you have a relationship between a man and a woman, and potentially they have a child or maybe 2 children, they don't have 3 because you don't have 3 children in Japan. But if they had a relationship, it's very common for one of them to be more loving than the other one is. And as a matter of fact, the more loving one of them acts, the less loving the other one is. Now in the United States, we would probably refer to that as borderline personality disorder or codependence. But that's common in Japan. It's the way they think marriages are supposed to be. One person acts like they don't care, and the other person does everything for them. You know, takes off their slippers and makes sure that their food is okay. You feeling hot? You feeling feverish?
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I am.
You are feverish?
Over my sickness.
German Schadenfreude has no equivalent in English. Schadenfreude means it's a pleasant feeling watching somebody else in pain, watching somebody else suffer. Schadenfreude. That seems like cruelty to me. I mean, just really weird. But the Germans, I don't know. Germans have a real odd way of looking at things. Of course, I was stationed out there for 3 years, over there. Not out there, it's over there. Played soccer against the Germans. Boy, I'll tell you what, they'll just take you down. They'll splash all over the ground, hoping that, you know, pieces of you fall off as you're rolling on the ground. And they laugh. They think it's fun and funny. The Ifaluk have what they refer to as Fago, which has no equivalent in English. Fago is a mark of maturity that shows compassion for the weak and love and sadness for these select individuals. In other words, it's compassion. The Chinese have no translation for the word self-esteem. Why? Well, the Chinese are a collectivist country. So individuals don't have their own identities, so they wouldn't have a concept of self-esteem. Sign seen in a Chinese hotel: please don't accept stranglers' invitation so as not to be cheated. Stranglers. They meant strangers. Sign in a Chinese store: please don't touch yourself. Let us help try you out. Please, let us help try you out. Don't touch yourself. Let us help try you out. I'm sure it meant something else. Sign in Cambodian hotel: wishing you a bon voyage. Bon, of course. Now the weird thing about this is that Cambodia was part of Indochina, so French is one of their languages, and here they misspelled bon voyage. Sign in Hong Kong bathroom: for keeping toilet clean and tidy, please dump it at the dustbin. They were saying, you know, take a dump in the in the dustbin. They're saying, put your trash in the dustbin. But didn't quite get there. Sign on Japanese street: when carrying a parasol, please be careful to get in the way of other people around you. Not to get in the way of other people around you, I think. Sign in a Japanese drugstore: we make up prescriptions. We prepare, make up, prepare, get it? Sign in a Bucharest hotel lobby: the lift is being fixed for the next day. During that time, we regret that you will be unbearable. Sign in a Paris hotel: please leave your values at the front desk. A sign in an Athens hotel: visitors are expected to complain at the office between the hours of 9 and 11 a.m. daily. Sign in a Japanese hotel: you are invited to take advantage of the chambermaid. Huh? Sign in a Paris dress shop: dresses for streetwalking. If you guys know what a streetwalker is. All right. I put, this is actually a streetwalker, and the reason I put it up there is because in Europe, if you cross your ankles, that means you're open for business. If they cross their ankles, just like this, which is, I don't know, it's kind of hard to stand like that, but they do it. Yeah. So if you're driving along the street in Germany and you see all these women standing along the road, if they don't have their ankles crossed, you better not stop and proposition them. But if they do have their ankles crossed, it means they're open for business. Usually they have a car parked behind them, and that's where you're supposed to have sex with them, in their car. This was back in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, it took me 3 years to figure all this stuff out. I'd ask my friends to figure out what was going on. They have actually have brothels in Germany, just like they do in Amsterdam. They have brothels. The buildings with hearts on it means it's a brothel. It's where you go for a good time. Signed in a German campground, it is strictly forbidden on our Black Forest camping site that people of different sex, for instance, men and women, live together in one tent unless they are married with each other for that purpose. A little involved. Soviet weekly newspaper, there will be a Moscow exhibition of arts by 15,000 Soviet Republic painters and sculptors. These were executed over the past 2 years. Which is kind of sad. In this Mallorca is actually an island in the Mediterranean Sea. It belongs to Spain, Mallorca does. Here, speeching American. We speech American here. Okay, anyway, so sometimes things don't translate very well. Okay, you may get the word right, but it doesn't. The context is incorrect, as we just saw with some of those really strange signs. Even for relatively fluent speakers, word choice can be a problem. I read lots of papers. And sometimes you guys don't select the right word. Sometimes you don't use the right preposition with the right verb. Select verbs have select prepositions that go with them. And sometimes it just doesn't work that way. I habla español un poquito, which even that sentence wasn't correct. But sometimes I use the wrong preposition and they just laugh at me like crazy. So I try to be good, but sometimes I'm not. The most commonly used method of ensuring that a translation is accurate is to have someone translate the translation back into English. This technique is known as the back translation method. So what you do is you translate something, write it in the foreign language, then you take that translation and you give it to somebody else and have them translate it back into English to make sure that it says what you think it says. One of the interesting things about English is that English is a pidgin language. English is arranged in subject, verb, and then object of the verb. That's the way it's put together. This is the way you put together a pidgin language. So if I didn't speak Navajo and I wanted to talk to you guys, I would probably say the noun first, then I would use a verb, try to find a verb that fit, and then I would, if there was something else, I would use the object. Man, go home. Something like that. I would probably do it that way. I don't know how Navajo is put together. Is it put together that way? It's the subject, the verb, and then the object?
No,
Is the verb last?
no, the verb usually goes first.
Verb is first?
The description goes first,
Okay,
then the noun,
Sit down.
okay. And then the object.
the object.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. But if I were trying to speak Navajo, I would try to speak it the way that I speak English. English is noun, verb, object.
Yeah, like, if we were to say, man, go home,
Yeah.
it would be like, this man, go home, this man home, deep down means go, like that. basically.
So the verb's last, not first.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
So this man, home, go.
See, where's OJ when we need him? Oh, God. That'd take the next hour.
Like if you want to say the cat is laying over there,
Yeah?
you say Neleda must have. So Neleda means over there.
Okay.
Masa means cat, and Sitkin means laying down. Like the
Over
verb.
there, cat lays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Completely different from English.
And then it's a certain way, it has to match the verb, like the first, second, and third.
Mhm.
It's like, it's,
No, that's okay. I understand what you're talking about, because I've studied Latin, and I've studied French, and I've studied German, and they, all of them put their sentences together differently.
Mhm.
Latin, the verb's always at the end. The object is first, the noun is right beside the verb. So you say what you're thinking, and then you describe who the person is, and then you describe what the person's doing. That's how you do it in Latin. They've got like 12 tenses in Latin. Just drives you crazy. Response biases are factors that distort the accuracy of a person's response to surveys, and they become especially problematic when we compare groups that differ in their response biases. Some people will try to seem more socially desirable in their answers and disguise their true feelings to appear more socially desirable. Remember, I told you that the Japanese don't ever say no. So if a Japanese person was taking a survey, they would say yes on every question, even if some of the answers should have been no. There's a tendency for people from different cultures to vary in terms of how likely they are to express their agreement in a modern fashion. Choosing an item close to the end of the scale. Extremity bias, choosing an item in the middle of the scale, moderacy bias. And we see this, if you've ever have you ever done research, psychological research with a survey?
yeah, but,
Did-
yeah.
Okay. Did you get an extreme reaction or a moderate reaction?
Depending, well, I did mine on hoarding disorder.
Oh, hoarding disorder.
Yeah.
I took that survey. I still got it in my office, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and a lot of them, it was based on the Likert scale
Okay.
of like, do you perceive hoarding disorder as having more than 10 pairs of shoes?
Right.
And I would get the check mark, like they would disagree, but then they would, like, they would compare their family
Oh,
or on
okay.
themselves. But the survey was strictly about like family members, like
Sure.
how they perceive it on other people. But then they would strongly agree, but then they would say disagree, like verbally, because they don't think that they have the problem.
Or
but-
that their family has the problem. This is
Yeah.
all normal. Okay.
So it was just kind of like,
So it didn't give you very good results, did it?
no, I didn't find anything significant except for jewelry.
Ah,
I found out that it's not considered hoarder disorder in our cultural perspective.
okay. If you
It's-
accumulate jewelry?
Yeah, having 20 or more pieces wasn't considered because it's considered as value and wealth, even if it's passed down.
Right.
That's the only thing that I found. And I
Huh.
want to continue it with that Psych 4?
13?
No, with the.
498?
The independence. Independent research.
Oh,
I
then,
want-
yeah, it's 498.
I want to do that, but, I don't know. Was this,
If we had known, we could have opened 498 up.
yeah,
It wouldn't have been that difficult to.
because I already had my
Monitor.
IRB submitted through and everything, and I could have just extended it,
So are you doing, what are you doing, 499?
Mhm.
Okay.
so, yeah. So now it's just sitting there,
Okay.
my research project.
Huh.
And there's some things I want to do differently on the survey to make it more, I guess,
So you get better answers?
yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of like all over. I should have started in the beginning, like, is hoarding disorder on the reservation?
Right.
Instead of assuming that it's already on here.
Right.
And I should have took that step back first and then slowly.
Because I was reading a book over Christmas break, and they were talking about cars, derelict cars on the reservations.
Mhm.
And they were saying, this means wealth to us.
Mm.
Whether the car runs or not, it means wealth to us. And I was thinking, well, my neighbor's got a car that hasn't gone any place in about 3 years.
Mhm.
And he doesn't use it for parts. Up north, they use, they'll buy the same car over and over again, and then they'll just kind of steal pirate parts off of different vehicles. But he doesn't do anything with his, and it seems kind of odd to me, because where I come from, we don't do that. We don't have derelict cars in our houses, and if we do, then I don't know, it means that we don't want to pay money to get rid of it, I guess. But when I was up north, of course, everybody had a spare car in their driveway so that they could steal the alternator off of it or whatever. And it was usually, if they had a Chevy, and they had 2 or 3 Chevys out there.
Mhm.
But here, I don't know what he's doing with this thing. I haven't figured it out yet. His tires are flat, so he can't even roll it at this point. Why am I talking about this? We're talking about biases. Okay, yeah, I would have assumed that everything would be fairly moderate, because nobody wants to say anything negative about themselves or about their
The
Their
middle,
family, yeah.
I don't agree or anything.
Yeah, so everything would be as a 4, because it was, no.
I don't I didn't put that on my survey. I didn't put that like neutral
Right.
section. I mean, I could have put like a I don't know section.
Sure.
Because some things that
Right.
people didn't know. One question I had is, do you have any stories related to hoarding with cultural stories? Like the origin? Or any, remember how we have monsters, like
Right.
the laziness, poverty and all
Sure.
that? And I asked that question and a lot of people put no, but they actually wanted to put they didn't know.
Oh, okay.
So it was real interesting. A lot of people don't know
Right.
the actual story of where that comes from.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. African Americans and Hispanic Americans tend to give more extreme responses than Americans of European descent. Yeah, it's either a yes or no. They're either a 1 or a 7. They're never a 3 or a 4. But you get a bunch of European Americans together, and it's never a 1 or a 7. It's always a 3 or a 4. So they have moderacy bias. East Asians tend to be more moderate in their responses than European Americans. East Asians show a greater moderacy bias when they complete the materials in their native language than when they complete them in English. And this is really kind of interesting. China is a collectivist country. So when they're speaking in Chinese, they think in more collectivist terms. But since English is an individualistic culture, when they think in English, they think in more extreme ways of thinking anyway. One way to fix moderacy and extremity bias is by having the respondent answer as either a yes or a no, rather than using a like or like scale. You force them into either yay or nay, a 0 or a 1.
So that's a continuous and what's the other one called?
I'm sorry?
There's different terms for it, continuous, and then there's
Right.
the other one, I don't remember, categorical. Categorical is yes, no.
Forced response.
Yeah.
Though it's hard to quantify yes or no answers, of course, because you can't, it's either a 0 or a 1, yes or no. Tendency to agree with most statements is known as acquiescence bias and is an issue for cross-cultural comparisons. As I said, the Japanese always say yes. Always, they never say no. The acquiescence bias is a problem for cross-cultural research because cultures differ in their tendencies to agree with items. East Asians tend to have a relatively holistic way of looking at the world, and one consequence is that there are more possible truths in a holistic world. So if you're thinking holistically, anything can possibly be true. We tend to think in absolutes in the United States mainly because of our religion. Christianity is the major religion. Christianity sees things in absolutes. However, in a collectivist society, especially in Asia, where their religion is kind of fluid. Chinese are Taoists or Buddhist. The Japanese are Shinto or Buddhist. These two religions are not they're not strict. Christian religion is extremely strict. You got to do this or you're going to go to hell. You got to do this, you're going to go to hell. So everything is in an absolute as far as Christianity is concerned. Nothing is an absolute in Eastern cultures. So unfortunately, if you talk to these individuals, they can see a truth in just about any statement that you make, as interesting as that is. Now, the other curious thing about this is the author of your book, Heine, he's Canadian, but he's married to a Japanese lady. He lived in Japan. And the reason he teaches cultural psychology is because he lived in Japan. So he knows the two different Eastern and Western cultures. Now the funny thing is, as you just noticed, anytime anything dealing with Asia is negative, like what we just talked about, he doesn't refer to them as Japanese, he refers to them as East Asian. Anytime something negative happens in the United States, he says the United States does this wrong. But if it's something that's also true of the Canadians, then he will call them North Americans. He won't say anything negative about Canada. He won't say anything negative about Japan. It's really kind of curious reading the textbook. Once you find out that he's from, I was reading the textbook when I first was looking at it, and I realized he never says anything negative about Japan. What's going on? There was all kinds of negative things about Japan, but he never says anything. And at that point I said, I'll bet he's married to a Japanese lady. And we find out at the end of the book, of course, it's like a novel. You find out at the end of the book that he's married to a lady from Japan. That's interesting as that is. People tend to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves with others, and these are, of course, we see ourselves as similar others. We were talking about this last time. Eastern agency, Northern agency, Southern agency, Western agency. Everybody's different. They look different. You said you can identify people by the way they look. When we are assessing ourselves in terms of how tall, how intelligent, or punctual we are, what matters is how tall, intelligent, or punctual we view ourselves compared to most other people around us. Okay, I'm from Indiana. From the place where I'm from is a bunch of not very tall people. I'm not average, I'm a little bit short, even for people in my portion of Indiana. But they're not very tall people. So when I went to Oklahoma, when I was stationed in Oklahoma, I always felt like I was a midget or something because they are so damn tall in Oklahoma. They're also tall in Montana. Those are the tallest people I've ever been around. It's really kind of interesting. But they were buffalo hunters. They were plains Indians. So the taller you were, the more likely you were to be able to kill a buffalo. So that was...
Yeah, I noticed that. Them crows are pretty tall.
Oh, jeez.
Went up there like 10 years ago for a crow fair. Watch them just walking around.
I know, they're so damn tall.
I was thinking to myself, I bet you'll probably already know them now. Just keep this short little Navajo here, you know?
Let's look at this cute little Navajo guy.
Right, just like a little short, cute, stubby Navajo walking around here.
I was at a powwow with the Meskwaki up in Tama, Iowa. It was really kind of interesting. I'm walking around and here's all these foxes. They're the Sac-and fox, are the Meskwaki. But we're walking around and here's a booth with a Navajo guy and a Hopi guy in there. And I thought, wow, I know these people. Little bitty short guys, they must be from down south. And I was teasing them about the fact that they were traveling together, you know, this isn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But they were okay with it. They were okay, and they thought it was funny. The Hopi guy did, the Navajo guy wasn't laughing at all. But the Hopi guy was laughing, as interesting as that is. Okay, so we compare ourselves with the people that are around us. So I didn't think I was that short until I joined the military. Well, actually, I went to college and I was kind of short too. But of course, I was an athlete in college, so I didn't have to worry about it. But then once I joined the military and I went down to Oklahoma and I went to Germany, oh geez, the Germans are tall people too. These are really big people. So at that point, I was comparing myself with somebody else. And since it wasn't the people that I grew up with, I felt like I was smaller, a lot smaller. And since the people that I grew up with were just ridiculously smart, I thought I was dumb. And then I joined the military, and I had never seen so many dumb people in my life. They were so unintelligent. Anyway, it was really kind of interesting. So this is the reference group effect. It's critical for cross-cultural research because people from different cultures tend to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to different reference groups and thus to different standards. Understanding the reference group conundrum, the researcher should always be aware of the reference group effect. Who are they referring themselves to? Who are they comparing themselves to? This is what we need to determine. Is Reese Witherspoon attractive? Is this lady attractive? Well, where she comes from, everybody looks like this. So she may not see herself as especially attractive. Reese Witherspoon's from Texas. Is she attractive?
Yeah.
Probably, but she wouldn't see herself as attractive because she's not very tall. When I lived in Texas, and I was stationed there 4 times, when I was in Texas, a lot of the girls are tall and slender, blonde, with really long legs. Well, she's not that tall, so she wouldn't see herself as attractive, as weird as that sounds. She would see herself as too short. Her legs are too short. You know, she would focus on something and tell people that she's not very attractive. The interesting thing about Korea right now is that the Koreans are getting their eyes fixed. They're bobbing their eyes. And the reason is because they want to have Western eyes, big round eyes. If you go to Asia, you go to Korea, you go to Japan or China, they have almond-shaped eyes. They're not round, they're almond-shaped. So what they're doing is they're having their eyelids, they're having that fat pad underneath their eyelids taken out so that their eyelids come up higher, and now they've got these big round eyes.
I've noticed that. It's like Japanese have thicker eyebrows and a wider face, it seems.
Okay, well, actually,
And Chinese are more slender and skinny.
I think you got it backwards.
But
The Japanese have,
then their eyes are like really like thin, but then the others like Vietnamese and Koreans,
Right.
I noticed that their eyes are kind of bigger.
a little bit
Wider,
bigger, not a
wider.
whole lot bigger, but see, there's a fat pad. It's called the epicanthic fold. It's a glob of fat underneath your eyelid. And what they're doing is they're having that fat pad taken out so that their eyelid comes up farther. And now they have big round eyes. This is new. This is something brand new. It's only been around for about 10 or 15 years. You know, before, somebody from China didn't want to look American, they wanted to look Chinese. But now everybody wants to have great big eyes like Westerners do. As weird as that is. We won't argue about what Japanese and Chinese look like. Because you're talking about lots and lots of different groups. But primarily the Chinese have round faces. Koreans have square faces, and Japanese have triangular shaped faces. Yeah, they said they have really sharp chins. Anyway, she's Chinese. She has a round face. One classic example of reference group effect was a study done looking at African American soldiers in 1949 while the South was still suffering through Jim Crow. So while they were down south, if they were a black soldier and living in the South, of course they couldn't go anywhere because they had to sit in the back of the bus. Sometimes they couldn't ride in the bus. They were treated very negatively. They couldn't look a white guy in the eye. Because if they looked him in the eye, it was like they were challenging him. And in the South, that meant that they had to fight. So I was down in Mississippi in the 90s, 95 through 98. I was down in Mississippi. So as I'm walking around town, you know, I say hello to everybody, whether it was somebody that was black or whether they were white. Well, if it's somebody white, they would say hello back to me. If it was somebody that was black, they wouldn't even look me in the face. It's kind of like me walking down the sidewalk and somebody's got their earbuds in and they're trying to ignore me. They don't even look at me. It's like I don't exist. But they were doing the same thing. But they were doing the same thing because if I were a southern white guy and they looked me in the eye, then I would probably do something negative. Yell at them, or maybe even punch them, or push them off the sidewalk. This is in the 90s, and this kind of stuff was still going on. So they learned who I was in Columbus, Mississippi. That's where I was teaching. They learned who I was, so black people started saying hello to me. Now the weird part was, sometimes they get in trouble because people saw them saying hello to me, and then somebody would come up later and tell them, I saw you disrespecting that white man, you know, by looking him in the face. As weird as that sounds. So it got really strange in Columbus, Mississippi and there's an Air Force base there. And you would think the Air Force personnel wouldn't put up with that stuff. But I don't know. It's like we were saying before. Sometimes people want to act like the people around them. And that's the way the Air Force personnel were acting. Now my wife, of course she's from Georgia, but
Oh my God.
I knew that was going to happen sometime.
Oh my God.
You're such a troublemaker. The soldiers were less satisfied. Now weirdly enough, they did a survey, and so they asked them how they liked living in Chicago or how they liked living in Louisiana. And strangely enough, they said they liked living in Louisiana more than they liked living in Chicago, where they were treated as equals in Chicago, and they were treated like third-class citizens in Louisiana. But there's a reason why they did this. The soldiers were less satisfied about living in the North than living in the repressive South. Could it be that they didn't like the better treatment and the obvious freedoms that they found in the North? Because they were given all the freedoms of everybody else. They were treated like equals in the North. But in the South, they were treated like third-class citizens. With analysis, they found that the soldiers gave their answers because they were using local African Americans as their reference group. So because they were better off and they acted more individualistic in the South than the other African Americans around them who were from the South, because they felt that they were superior to them, they liked they were more satisfied with living in the South, because they were comparing themselves with the other black people that lived in the South. And of course they were in a really negative situation, so they felt a lot better about living with people that were lower than they did living in the North, where a lot of people were acted equal to them or superior to them who were African American. Because African Americans were better off in the North than in the South, the soldier's life was more satisfying in the South by comparison. And that's why they got that survey. Now, strangely enough, there are individuals that will take this survey and they will say people like black people like Southerners more than they like Northerners. I've had this argument, and I had this argument less than 6 years ago, with an individual. This guy from North Carolina screaming about how black people hate Northerners. And he used this as an example, but he didn't understand what was going on, as weird as that is. When asked how much people valued enjoying life and pleasure, the results showed that the dour East Germans who you couldn't get them to smile unless there was blood involved, they scored third highest on the survey. East Germans, and of course you don't know, I was there when they were East Germans. These were not happy people, okay? They were living under communism for one thing, and the Russians hated them because, well, they had fought a war against the Germans, and the East Germans were the only ones they could come in contact with. So they treated them really bad. They gave them bad food, they gave them bad clothing. Of course, it's cold in that portion of Germany. It's not the happiest place in the whole wide world. But they scored the third highest on the happiness scale. They enjoy life. How in the world could the East Germans enjoy life? They're trying to escape to the West all the time. So why do they enjoy life so much? The weird part was that the Italians, who maintain a lifestyle emphasizing good food, leisurely breaks in cafes, opera, art, and long summer vacations, came in next to last on the enjoying life and pleasure scale. Now, this doesn't make any sense. Now, why in the world would the East Germans, who have the crappiest life you could possibly imagine, why would they enjoy life more than the Italians do, who really do enjoy life? They have parties all the time, family are over, they drink a lot of wine, they have a good time, they'll go out to the cafes and just survive, and they just love it. They just have a wonderful life. So what in the world's going on here? And the answer is, it has to do with their reference group. Who are they comparing themselves to? Well, the East Germans didn't have anybody to compare themselves to except each other. So looking at their neighbors, they said, yeah, I enjoy life a lot more than my neighbor does, because he's a drunk, he doesn't get enough vodka, but I do, so I'm better off than he is. So they scored high on that. But the Italians, on the other hand, their reference group were other Italians who were having an equally good time as they were. So because of that, they gauged themselves as not enjoying life nearly as much as their neighbor who went to the opera every night, or who just loved art, or who had a villa with their own wine or whatever. So because of their reference group was different, they scored lower on the enjoying life scale.
So it's kind of like down-to-earth, hearted people, and people that live off of a certain structure.
It's like who you're comparing yourself to. So if you live in Washington, D.C., or you live in New York City, and so you've got Mike Bloomberg there, you've got Donald Trump, and all these people are going, geez, I've got this really nice hotel, and I inhabit the whole 7th floor. You think that you're in pretty bad shape because you're comparing yourself to billionaires.
Yeah.
So your reference group is different. Now, where I live in Iowa, everybody around me are farmers, and I live pretty good. My reference group is pretty good because I've got this nice house. I've got 5 acres. I've got apple trees. I've got two lawnmowers. I've got 4 cars. So I'm comparing myself to all the people that live around me. I work 9 months out of the year. They have to work 12 months out of the year. So my reference group would be completely different. But I have to compare myself with whoever those people are. That's my reference group.
Oh, okay.
When I was growing up, I grew up in a factory town. So I would compare myself with people that worked in the factory. That's my reference group. And they didn't have very much education. They made a hell of a lot more money than I did. But that was my reference group, were factory workers.
Kind of sounds like country music.
Right.
Modern country songs nowadays.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, comparing like, you live in the city with all the congestion and this and that.
Right.
expecting women to make you happy and make you whole.
Right.
But yet, I'm over here living in what, humbly, and how we talk to one
Yeah.
another, and,
Thank God I'm a country boy. Exactly. It all depends on what your reference group is. So the Italians, even though they had such a wonderful lifestyle, because they were comparing themselves to other people that have such a wonderful lifestyle, they scored lower than the East Germans did, who live in the most god-awful place you could possibly imagine. I was there. I had to go into East Germany through Checkpoint Charlie, and what's the time?
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, golly, it is time. I apologize. Let me turn this thing off.
I gotta leave at 3.
It's your fault.